Appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to invite my panelists to come right on up so we can get the show on the road. You're in for a real treat. So we have Eric Cho from the Department of Homeland Security. And Eric, why don't you wave as you come up? Because you know me, I move quickly. Yep. And we have Josh Cohen from the Veterans Affairs Department. And I really wanted an industry rep on the panel, so we called out to Mark Pearl from the Homeland Security Defense Business Council to give us an industry perspective. And last but certainly not least, Dave Svinich, I knew I was going to mess it up, Svinich from GSA. Dave?
Dave.
Oh, you didn't cheer that loud for me. No, just kidding. All right, we're going to have a little fun this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about innovations in procurement. And we're going to really focus on innovations in procurement this morning. And to set the stage, I want to define what I mean by innovations in procurement. For those of you who may not know me, I am Soraya Correa. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. And I took that position in January of 2015. And from the moment I walked in the door, I came with a very focused mission, and that is to change the way we do procurement, the way we see procurement, the way we behave in procurement, and the way we work with our customers in procurement. My vision is to make sure that the procurement staff at the Department of Homeland Security are creative, innovative, and flexible business advisors to their customers. So we're looking to help develop solutions. And when I talk about innovations in procurement, what I mean is there are the four corners of the FAR, and within those four corners, there is quite a bit of flexibility. There are quite a few, I'm sorry, can you everybody hear me? My voice faded out. Anyway, there are quite a few tools available to us in the FAR that we're sometimes not taking advantage of. Also, there's a lot of ability to be creative and be flexible with the rules that are within the four corners of the FAR. And so what I did was challenge my team by standing up what I call the Procurement Innovation Lab, and Eric Cho is going to talk a little bit about that because he's the manager of the lab. But I challenged my team to come to the table with the ideas, those crazy ideas that they've been thinking about trying, but were a little too afraid to try because they might fail. Because I think that to be innovative, that to be creative, to change the way we do business, we have to try new things. And we're going to stub our toe, or as my good friend Mr. Luke McCormick used to say, we're going to break a few eggs. And that's okay, because we're going to learn from it. So when I talk about innovations in procurement, I'm really talking about working with within the parameters of the FAR, those four corners, but using all of the tools and all the flexibilities that are in there in a creative and flexible way to achieve the very best outcome for our customer. Focusing on quality, making sure that we're getting the best products and services, ensuring that we get the best prices, fair and reasonable prices, so that we have affordable procurements, and I like to use the term affordable. And last but not least, making sure that we do it efficiently. Let's get through this evaluation process as quickly and as effectively as possible so we can get the product or service in the hands of the user, because at the end of the day, what we are here to do is to support mission. Whether it's protecting the homeland, serving our veterans, or delivering Social Security checks, it doesn't matter. We're here to deliver a mission, and we can't be tied up in procurements endlessly. So with that, I'm going to turn to Eric, and I'm going to have you lead off by introducing yourself, and I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their perspective on innovations in procurement, and then we're going to engage in a friendly discussion about innovation.
Okay, so, I'll move over here so that I can see everybody.
He's so nice.
So here in DHS, we are trying to create a learning culture where people are encouraged to try to take appropriate risks to improve our business processes. And we focus on two buckets of activities: testing and sharing. Through testing, we try to develop innovative new techniques and tools to either speed up the process, reduce burden, and improve the outcome. By improving the outcome, we are talking about, hey, what are the better ways to decide which contractor is the best capable company who can do the job well and fail less. So that is our goal. Through those testing, we develop those ideas and techniques, and then we share across DHS enterprise through webinars. So those people who haven't had the chance to test those can learn and then obtain samples And then these people would then customize and improve those techniques and then reapply those techniques into their own acquisitions. So that learning cycle is what we are trying to develop in DHS. That rapid learning cycle is going to, we think, so I believe strongly that the sort of a grassroots level learning cycle is really going to be, what's driving DHS innovation going forward. So about, 2 years ago when we started DHS Pill, we did a survey among all these DHS acquisition professionals about, hey, what's stopping you from innovating? Because the FAR says you shall innovate, right? Business processes. And why aren't you? Over 70% of our people says fear and cultural resistance as the reason they are innovating. About 2 years later, Soraya and Chip Fulgham, our acting USM, held a town hall, and then we did another survey about, hey, where are we with culture of innovation? About 40% says they are encouraged to innovation in their own work site. Another 50% says, no, we're not there yet, but I'm getting the good vibe. We are moving in the right direction. That's what we say. So about 90% of our DHS workforce is saying, we are feeling good about where we are in terms of being encouraged to take risks and innovate. So that is, I think we are moving in the right direction, and so I can tell more about it. So we are focused on changing those culture.
That's right. So with that, Josh, would you like to talk a little bit about Veterans Affairs?
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Josh Cohen. I'm obviously from the VA. I work at the Technology Acquisition Center in New Jersey. Mainly I support the T4NG contract for anybody that's aware of that, similar to the DHS Eagle contract. But of late, I've been doing a lot more digital services, and at an operational level, kind of being the one to not say no. So it's understanding the FAR well enough to when the challenge of whatever is on the plate in front of us, whether it be a SaaS product or implementing that agile software development or something like that, it's how do we physically write a contract compliant with the FAR that allows the flexibilities that all of these technologies need. And it has certainly been a very challenging thing, and I can't say that we necessarily have all of it right yet. I think what's most important is that we keep trying new things, and I would say that the VA is in a very transformative time at the moment, and everybody's really come to the conclusion that the paradigm shift is needed, and I'm very much looking forward to be a part of that change. And again, just really trying to take the problem of the contract out of the equation. The FAR is not the problem. It's more a cultural issue, and changing minds, and kind of just being stick-to-itiveness to keep pushing along and keep trying new things even when something you tried didn't work out that great.
Thank you. That's outstanding.
Thank you.
Dave, how about I let you take the lead there before I jump to Mark?
I'm Dave. Thank you for having me. I'm from GSA with the Technology Transformation Service and a group called ACT-IAC within the Technology Transformation Service. I joined ACT-IAC a couple of years ago with the mission of making procurement joyful. Ultimately, what we started to realize is that procurement, as Soraya noted, is here for mission. It's not for us. Like nobody wants procurement function just for the sake of procurement. You're trying to make the mission work effectively. And we realized that for people to actually be effective buyers, they needed to actually enjoy the act of buying. And I needed my contracting officers to enjoy the act of buying. And the industry that was working with us to actually enjoy the act of selling and working with government. And so we've been working in the last several years to try to create that culture and to sort of establish the sense that procurement is not a thing to be dreaded, but a thing to be sought after and enjoyed. And part of that has been thinking through the flexibilities, sort of treating, I used to be an attorney in a past life where the goal was to say yes until you can't. And that's kind of the same thing that I think about from a procurement standpoint, is to say yes until you can't, and to really try to figure out how we can partner with industry, how we can partner with our agency partners, partner with our internal customers within GSA, and establish a sort of expectation of quality throughout the life cycle of an acquisition, both pre-award and post-award, to establish trust so that industry, when they work with GSA, understands that they're getting a really informed and excellent purchase, and also an informed partner in the delivery. As Eric noted, this is really a cultural thing. The FAR is pretty broad. We can do most of what we need to in Part 8 and Part 12. Just recently, actually pretty proud of this, TTS awarded a bug bounty it's the first civilian public bug bounty program in the US. We did it in Part 12, no big deal. But there are a lot of things that we had to do as part of this process to really understand what a bug bounty would look like. We had to establish a vulnerability policy. We had to think through what it would mean from an appropriation standpoint to have the money up front. How would you actually manage this afterwards so that if a vulnerability was disclosed that you would actually be able to execute on it? And so part of what we're really trying to do is imagine not just the act of buying, but the overall expectations of what a joyful experience should be in the acquisition process.
Yeah. So Mark, you come to us from an industry perspective, and I know you've been engaged with pretty much all of these agencies and working with companies who work with all these agencies. What's your perspective on our innovations in procurement?
Good morning, all. Thank you, Sarai, for inviting us and bringing this kind of perspective. The Homeland Security and Defense Business Council, which was founded about over 12 years ago by the leading executives, the CEOs, as well as the P&L leads, the profit and loss leaders, came together 12 years ago in many ways for the express purpose of where we are today. The way in which traditional trade associations existed, which was the advocacy of their product, their service, lobbying Congress, and having that process, was not necessarily going to work for a new agency that was the first, in essence, new federal agency since the formation of the Pentagon in the late 40s. And they wanted to, in essence, not be your mother's trade association. To, in essence, how do we engage, develop a relationship with the government executives, not just procurement folks, but throughout the entire array of folks that are trying to, in essence, provide solutions to the problems. And in this case, this new thing called, even though it wasn't really new, but this now Department of Homeland Security. The concept was very simple. It was, if we get to work with each other and you as government officials don't see us as the contractor, bid on the contract and I don't want to hear anything more from you. And I certainly don't want to have you protest. But I don't want to hear anything more from you. We'll have a great relationship. That was changed. That changed with, in essence, the folks that had both been in government and now were in the private sector. That took a while within the Homeland Security. We're seeing that more and more now. And the concept was, how do we develop a roadmap? In fact, Rafael Boris, the former Undersecretary of Management, came to our leadership and said, develop for me a framework for industry government engagement throughout the life cycle. So I'll go backwards. In stage 4, as we called it, contract execution. How do you, in essence, do that better? Going backwards to procurement, backwards to pre-procurement. All of those things are set off in the FAR. But the one thing that wasn't was what we call stage 1. And stage 1 was a kind of business strategy, where even the procurement SMEs were not even in the room. Tell us, the higher-ups, whether it's Congress or whether it's 1600 or whether it's even the Secretary, tell us how to procure after we've told you what the solution, get the solution. And what we've developed is a framework of a kind of life cycle that takes everyone back to identifying first the problem. And that's when things like the culture that Eric is talking about has to change, because these are not within the FAR, and sometimes people hide behind the FAR. So the concept of what we wanted to develop, and in fact have, and we can talk about that a little bit more, particularly with your team, but is developed a framework for conversation, engagement, that will, in essence, talk about the problem before you jump to solution and requirements, because that's what everybody will jump to. I've got the widget that will solve your problem. We don't talk about the problem. And in the Homeland Security arena, when the culture is fear of failure because it even is at a higher level, we don't see that. And so what we've begun to do is look at another eye within ourselves, which what are the incentives to bring innovation to the government. And that's the concept that I think this kind of discussion and the kinds of things that we're acting out that we'll talk about throughout government has to take place. And so that's the perspective that I think industry has going in.
No, appreciate that. So yeah, Eric raised this, and Josh and Dave, actually, we've all mentioned it, culture. So when I took my position and when I accepted this position, I came with a mindset that I really do want to change the culture, because I've long held that procurement is a team sport. And it starts at the very beginning. It starts when you're thinking about getting a budget. I always tell the program office, if you're starting to talk about the budget for something, you're probably going to buy something. So let's all come to the table and let's talk about the problem. And Josh said something that resonated with me, because it's one of my common phrases: we got to get to yes. The answer isn't no. If you've got money and you've got a requirement and we've got a problem to solve, we got to figure out how to make this happen. And it takes all of us working together. And I do include industry in that, Mark. You raise a very valid point. So one of the things that I've really emphasized heavily is the industry engagement piece. But I was going to ask Eric to kind of lead off a little bit, talk a little bit about how the pill actually works with the program and the procurement folks, so that way we can lead into a further discussion of some of the other innovations that are out here.
So typically our testing engagement starts with somebody in DHS Enterprise submitting a project. It's voluntary. So they can decide, hey, I have this cool acquisition and procurement that I need to do. By the way, it does not have to be procurement. It could be process improvement or other things. But majority of our activities are actually some contracting activity that they are doing. So they submit our case, and then our team essentially engage with them in their brainstorming session and explain to them about the pill ConOps, and then explain to them from that point on until the contract award completion. We'll do bi-weekly engagement with the team, consisting of the contracting officer, program manager, and the legal. So they can involve other people, but we want those 3 individuals that are accountable as a team to make progress. So we treat that procurement contract formation process as if it's sort of an agile project in itself.
Okay.
So essentially we do like sort of a daily stand-up type of engagement. No more than 15 minutes, by the way. We just hang up the phone in 15-minute mark and basically focus on, hey, what has the team done and make good decisions for the last 2 weeks? What will you do next 2 weeks to make quality contract awards as soon as possible? And what are the obstacles? We want the team to be self-empowered to overcome those obstacles and figure out a way to get to the quality contract award. So we go through that exercise and support the team as needed. There are some things that the team locally cannot resolve.
Right.
That's where Soraya and our top management support comes in figuring out some very difficult legal issues, ITAR reviews, and all these other things that tends to take time. So we try to overcome and support them as going along. Once they complete the project, PIL then conduct a customer survey among the program officer, the user. We do a phone interview, like 30 minutes. Don't write anything, just talk to us about, hey, did it work? Was the process effective, and why not? And then we also engage, call the winning vendor and disappointed bidder to see, hey, what's your feedback about our techniques and processes? And get the 30-minute phone interview and then summarize them anonymously, and then provide the feedback to the team before they share in the webinars, and then share their samples and across DHS enterprise-wide. So before they teach others, we want them to take advantage of the feedback they got and then highlight what worked well and what did not work well. We learned from other users and the other agency users saying that, hey, sharing samples is not good enough. Sharing RFPs is not good enough because you don't know what's good and what's bad. We want to share the context of the techniques used in that RFP and then tell them, hey, use this, and then but next time you do it a little differently because this thing did not work too well. So that is sort of our learning framework where we try to feed off of each other. We do have for example, great story where there was one contracting shop which did not feel comfortable doing oral presentations. They simply were not like, hey, we did written proposals all the time and we don't want to do anything differently. They argued with the program manager for like several months, and then they finally decided to do oral. Once they have completed successfully, like every time they do a new acquisition, they want to do oral because it's easier and faster.
Yeah.
So we see like the people around them sort of change it. They become the evangelists themselves.
Exactly. And that's how you change culture.
Yep.
Dave, did you
I'll
want to?
I'll take a crack at it. So one of the things, you mentioned the word Agile. Now I'm going to I had this realization not that long ago when I was thinking about Agile, that the contracting process historically was very waterfall. The process itself, you would start with pre-requirements, then you get requirements. The program would never involve contracting. Then they would throw it over the wall to contracting. Contracting would throw it over the wall to legal. Legal would throw it back to contracting. Contracting would throw it back to the program. Then you throw it to the CIO. Then you throw it over to industry. You never talk to them, and then you get it back, and then you'd start your work. This was bound to be successful every single time. Never. So we decided to reimagine what it would look like to get to have people talking to each other, sort of a novel concept of having sort of a cross-functional team. And so what I'm going to now do is reveal one of the secret sauces of when AT&F does its procurements. Is that the first thing that I'll do is I'll insist that you have a workshop. We'll do a kickoff workshop. And it's usually a very awkward conversation because people are like, I'm going to take a full day from my busy schedule to just sit down and talk about a procurement. And you say, yes, if it's an important procurement, you're going to sit down. We're going to get everybody who's relevant in the room. We're going to sort of decide on what the product vision is. We're going to decide on the problem statement. And that's it. We're going to really come to consensus internally about how we're going to proceed. And that starts the rest of the procurement process. So you get that alignment up front about what you're actually trying to solve, and what usually you discover is that the thing that people thought they were going to solve isn't really it. They were trying to solve a very specific business problem, or they were trying to solve a specific technical issue, and you say, okay, well, let's solve that piece. Before we focus on everything else and all the other complications and all the things that are going to throw this off, let's solve that one piece, and then the next piece, and then the next piece. And over time, you start to build that momentum and that cadence, and you can start to actually improve your whole system. And it turns out, using that same process of doing small incremental chunks, repeating and sort of improving every time, gets you to better results at the end.
And I think you raised a really important point, and Eric did too. It's about that initial conversation. I've long held that extra time that we take in the upfront process, talking to one another, whether it's the procurement, talking to legal, and the program, and I do like the concept of bringing everyone together for that conversation. And I always tell the procurement folks, how about you ask questions? How about you ask why, and what do you need, and what are you looking for, and why are you trying to do that? And what do we know about the industry that sells this? Should we go out and talk to the industry and learn a little bit more? Because I think it's that conversation that starts the relationship going. A program wants to know that the people that are buying for them really care about what they're buying, and that they understand. And I think when we get that concept of mission ingrained in us and we think that way, I think it's really effective. Anybody want to share?
Well, as I've been listening to you guys, the thing that really comes to mind is trust. And I feel like when I got into contracting or procurement, my initial feeling was that it was very transactional.
Yes.
It was very compliance-based. You were told you're part of the business process, but you were really a regulator. You were really there to apply this very strict assumption of the FAR. And over the years, we lost trust. We lost the trust, I think, to some extent of our customers that we will empathize with their needs. We will take the time, whether it be a 15-minute conversation or a day-long conversation. In our case, we do a 30-minute conversation, again, with no documents, specifically with no documentation, just to discuss need. And I feel like what that has started to do is build that trust. It's still a problem, and it's still, but I think the cultural challenges around all of this become much easier to deal with if there is a better relationship of trust between all parties, whether it be industry, our customers, executive leadership, the White House, and that's a big part of how I look at the modernization that has to happen.
I agree.
That's right. We believe appropriate conversation up front before issuing the RFP saves time.
Yes.
We do have a solid example where we had $9 million cybersecurity contract. It was awarded in 89 days, mainly because the contracting team decided to release the sections L and M before they released the RFP, and then had one-on-one conversation with potential bidders, and worked out all these problems in instructions to the offerers and eval factors, which are the two most important parts that people look at, offerers look at. So actually, they worked out all these things and thereby avoided post-RFP Q&A. Essentially, I mean, how many times do we issue RFPs hurriedly and then get 100 questions, and then you have to then adjudicate and publicly post, and then you probably have to amend the solicitation, give them more time. It's a totally wasted processes and time where you could have easily avoided by having appropriate conversation.
And including legal in that conversation is really important. Mark?
Well, I still don't want to lose sight. I mean, this is the Procurement Innovation Lab, and so we're really in the middle of identifying a particular solution.
Right.
And whether it's RFP or draft RFP or even an RFI, it's there, we've identified. And that's why we need to identify the incentives rather than being pushed, solve this problem for me,
Right.
procurement folks, whether it's the management directorate at DHS or any procurement shop. Solve this problem for me, and you've got to better solve it for me in a way that's going to get as many bidders and as few protests as possible. And there is a lack of incentive to look at the problem. The very quick kind of story. 100 years ago, some agency says we need the fastest horse, and they put out the RFP for the fastest horse. And Henry Ford walks into the room because it's all part. And they say, no, we don't want to see you. We want the fastest horse. That's even too late for even getting to Henry Ford. The first question should be, what is your problem? And let's talk about what the problem. Where our problem is that we need the great coffee in our shop, and the fastest horse will bring it from Seattle to Washington better, faster. Well, your problem is getting coffee quick. And the question then is, what if somebody came along and said, I'm going to locate my coffee distributor across the street from your agency?
Right.
You don't need Henry Ford. You don't need the fastest horse. We don't have those conversations. Right. And so that is what we're trying to say. How do we get people in the room, whether it's service level agreements, whatever it is, and we've had discussions with DHS about that, so that it's not just market research going to the solution, but it's having collective input from different sources. That's why I pride myself, and everyone, whatever agency you're in, there have been people that have been in your shop who saw what the process was and are now in the private sector, and they shouldn't be shunned away because they now have that perspective. Innovations for innovation's sake doesn't work.
Right.
And that's, though we're all there.
Yeah.
Just because you're Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas, or Boston doesn't make you an innovative government contractor, because you haven't gone on the GSA schedule. You got, in the technologies, you got kids that look like this and might not pass security clearance and suitability. Oh yeah, you're great, but you're very innovative. I had to do that, Dad. I'm sorry. But not everybody. I got to tell you, there's some people who are not suitable who dresses. But the context is, how do we develop and nurture those conversations in a collective way so that when we do go, innovation, I think for many, is technology. That's the way we do it. And what we've been saying and what the pill says and everything else is that innovation is also process.
Right.
Innovative processes, innovative management structures, innovative ways of doing business. The only question I'll go back to, which is what I started with, which is, what is the incentive for industry to bring its most innovative products and services to the government when it's lowest price?
Exactly.
Okay? Or when the process doesn't allow for you to even discuss innovation because the cost factor is much too low. A lot of our companies have told me that they are getting away from R&D when they're just government play companies, because why would they invest heavily in R&D internally? There's not a lot, and we've seen in the at least proposed budget, not a lot for S&Ts across the board. Why should I go heavily into innovation, technologies, and other products and services when you don't have the money to even pay for it or the incentive to do it? And so that's part of this conversation that I think that this kind of panel and these kinds of things that the pill and what the whole CPO is doing, and we've had these conversations with GSA. We're doing a Reverse Industry Day, which you may talk about, where industry is sharing its perspective with GSA. We're doing one for DoD. We just did one for IRS. We're doing, I think, a fourth one.
See what I started?
with your office, in next month. The context is, the more that you as government hear that perspective, hear the challenges and the obstacles. It shouldn't be a pointing to the finger, because if you don't do it right, we're going to protest.
Right.
It should be, we are in this because we want to provide the greatest level of solutions. That's what the Homeland Security Industrial Base is about, or the Defense Industrial Base, or anyone who provides any of the services and products and technologies to any of your agencies.
Well, that was the concept behind the original Reverse Industry Day when I came up with that idea, that I really wanted to get the government out there in the audience and industry up here sharing their perspective, what drives them, what motivates them, how they view our solicitations, not for the purposes of critiquing, but for our learning, so that we could understand the perspective, we could put ourselves in industry shoes and have a better conversation. And I do think that we're making that progress. The fact that other agencies are doing Reverse Industry Days, and the fact that I have now program managers who pick up the phone and say, you know, I'm not real sure. I think we should talk to industry, but I don't have a solicitation. Can we do that? That's a great question. I'm like, yes, let's go. Let's have a conversation. You don't need a piece of paper, and in fact, you're better off because there's nothing to protest. The other thing I did want to add, because Eric raised it, two things that he mentioned. One thing is the protest. What I've told my staff repeatedly, you will assume that you will get a protest. Who cares? I care about winning the protest. And if we write a good procurement and we conduct it properly, we're probably going to win. But don't fear the protest. You're going to get it, and that is not in your control. So don't lose sleep over it. Make sure you write a good procurement, and that's what we should be focusing on. I do think that protests are a little out of control, but that, you know what, I don't control it, and I'm not going to sit here and discuss it. What I'm going to focus on is winning. The second thing, and I think this is important, and you'll always hear me harp on this, is leadership. And Eric mentioned a webinar that Chip Fulgham is the Acting Undersecretary for Management at DHS. He and I hosted a webinar, and from the beginning he's been extremely supportive of the Procurement Innovation Lab. And this is about making sure that people understand that we, the leaders of the agency, do have an appetite for errors and for failure. Human beings, being creative, being innovative, trying new things, we're bound to make mistakes. I call it stubbing the toe, some people call it breaking eggs, some people like the word failure. Whatever you want to call it, you got to have an appetite for that if you really want to encourage creativity and innovation. And Chip and I conducted an entire webinar on that. We had over 400 participants talking about the fact that it's acceptable, that there is a difference between failing because you were trying to be innovative versus a performance failure. And we as managers have to learn to accept that. So, Dave?
Yeah, I was gonna add one thing to sort of what Mark was getting at, which is the problem statement. One of the things that I think government doesn't do enough of is actually fail in the development of that problem statement. You know, one of the things that AT&F in particular does is really try to focus on prototyping early and develop a lot of user-centered design principles into your overall product design. It turns out often what we think we need is not what we need. Sometimes you have the horse, but sometimes it's actually less innovative. It's just, you know, everyone says, I have this particular need, and you say, actually nobody really cares about that problem. We've talked to your users. They don't interact that way. My favorite example of this, and I won't name names and I won't name the agency, but there was an agency who was absolutely convinced that it needed a web portal system. And when we actually sat down with the users were all using email. They weren't interacting with a web portal. They would never go on their BlackBerry and go into the web portal. They were going to use their email. And so we're like, how about we have an email-based system as opposed to a webmail-based or a web portal-based system? You can only really get those answers once you've actually interacted with the users. And if you're putting industry in the position of building a web portal because you've done your requirements document, guess what? You bought a thing that's useless, or at least not as useful as it could be. And so part of what we spend a lot of time thinking about is understanding what your real problems are based on what your users' experience are. And the only way that you can do that is, turns out, talking and having users interact with a real live system.
I would only say, but there are Steve Jobs of the world who we didn't know we needed, you know, the iPhone in the way that we did. We didn't know we needed those products. Is it, you know, government used to do this really well. I mean, DARPA is the classic, you know, example. We didn't know we needed the internet. The question is, how do we have a conversation that allows for that without a heavy investment of much of anything or what things that are going through, not for the purposes of having it turn into a contract.
Sure.
And that is what I think we have to get to. And that's why Chip and I maybe came up with it simultaneously, where we talk about what conversation is going to take place to the left of the buy.
Correct.
And we have not incentivized government to do it. We have not even incentivized industry because we want to sell. Everybody's job is dependent on that. So now if we recognize that that is the problem statement, how do we change the culture in a way? How do we incentivize both industry and government to think about the problems to the left of the buy when FAR isn't even in the room? And that's what I want to encourage.
So that's one of the things that I'm going to let Eric and I know that Josh want to chime in here. Strategic Industry Conversation at DHS, we host one each year. What we've tried to do is bring panels to talk about the problem sets that we're trying to solve at the 50,000 foot level. You know, aviation security, airport security, biometrics, border security. But at the 50,000 foot level, so that we can get those creative juices flowing, because like you said, we don't have to have a contract for every solution. Industry can be innovative on its own and invest in products and services and ideas and bring those ideas to us. We're always looking. Josh, let me give Josh.
Sure. So the thing that keeps resounding through me through this conversation is I'm not at the 50,000 feet, so I'm more operational, maybe the 5,000 feet. And I kind of wonder how someone at my level plays a role in that. And what really comes to mind is preparation. And I think, so I was a member of the DITAP program at USDS. I know there's other trainings out there like that, but I think what's really also important at the 50,000 foot level is that there's a feedback level to the ground, to the guys that are in the room, because I think it seems like there's a good move to culture shift at the top, but I think that preparation level at the middle and bottom still is a challenge. And people are always, when put in that position, I think, going to go back to what's comfortable and fear change. So I whether it be DITAP or any kind of training, I think we should incentivize people to go out there and learn some of these ideas. And I think ACT-IAC and PIL, everybody, I mean, they have done a great job selling that and getting it out there. But I think a lot more work in that area has to happen.
I agree, but that's an excellent point, Eric.
So Mark mentioned about innovative solutions. After all, government wants to allow companies to offer those innovative solutions and technologies and process re-engineering, which often cost a lot of money. So through the Reverse Industry Day and Strategic Industry Communications, DHS heard from many vendors saying, hey, unless you evaluate, allow us to present those innovative thoughts and ideas, no one in right mind is going to offer a more expensive solution just to lose opportunity to win a contract, right? So we then explore the way, hey, how do we then allow, during the evaluation sections, L&M, a place for innovative solutions to be evaluated and be rated by the government. So in a recent HART acquisition, which was our DHS-wide sort of biometrics, procurement, which is still going on, but public knowledge I'm going to share is that, hey, during the oral presentations, we add a element saying that, hey, during the oral, please explore your innovative solutions and approaches. And then we will evaluate and give you the opportunity to explain your price proposal as to, hey, explain to us how that innovative solution is going to save government in the long run. So we allowed a chance during sections L&M, a place for evaluation to be considered. I think that's critical because oftentimes we talk about innovative solutions and encourage them, but then we don't recognize that solution.
So at this point, I'm going to take a quick break and see if anybody out there has any questions for us. Any questions? See a couple of hands over here.
Hi, Steve Krause with GSA. I love the discussion here about looking at the problem statement and the discussions on the left side of the line. My guess is that some of you, but maybe not all of you, are familiar with what goes on the DoD side of the house with services acquisition workshops. And I can explain for people if they're not familiar, or one of you can if you're familiar with it. But I'd like to know more about, in the things that you're talking about, have you been working at all with DAU or with DoD, and how are you taking those concepts into account? Because a lot of what you're talking about sounds actually very similar in concept.
Anybody want to jump in? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'm just minor aware of it, and in part of that process, which is why, in essence, the hopefully incoming Undersecretary of Management at DHS, who comes out of DoD, is hosting next month at DoD a reverse industry day, a specific process that in fact parallels what you're talking about, which is even with those kind of workshops, the industry's input and perspective has been, we'll talk to you later, we'll share with you what we've been talking about. That's what we're trying to kind of talk, at least what I'm proposing, and I think that under Soraya's leadership and what Eric has been doing and everyone at DHS is at least let's have those kinds of discussions early on as much as possible. Two or 3 years ago, there was debriefing, sessions that we all put together. One of the things that came out of it was a couple of our members saying, there is no reason in the world that I'm not going to protest if I've put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the bid. But if you did more down selects, this was part of, came out at the debriefing discussions. If you did more down selects, I've not made the investment. I've not put all that money in. And therefore, just from a process standpoint, that's, is a down select an innovative process? Well, it is if some agency has never done it before.
Exactly.
Okay, innovation is, something that you can
in the
at
eye of
least
the
look
beholder.
at. And those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So the fact that DoD, even doing what you're talking about, which has been very helpful, but very government to government, to bring in that industry perspective, everybody welcomes it. And it's not one individual company. Right. It's not just whether it's a Lockheed Martin or a Raytheon or General Dynamics. It's the collective that we're trying to share, both the large, the mid-tier, which don't exist, but the mid-tier and the small that are part of these discussions so that you get those kinds of perspectives.
Mid-tiers are going to beat you up, by the way.
No, they love me. They love me so far.
So Soraya, I know that when we went out to Silicon Valley, you were actually a rock star. Normally they come up and they talk to the CIOs, and they wanted to talk to Soraya because she's the person that's going to be able to expand the marketplace and to be inclusive of companies that haven't necessarily done business with the federal government. Could you talk a little bit about what you heard from that community and what you took back and actually took as action to make that happen?
Sure. So thank you, Margie. That's a really good question. And the biggest thing that I learned out there is the fear of doing business with the government is because it's complicated. It's too hard. We require too much information up front. It takes too long. A lot of these startup companies are looking for quick capital to invest into their solution, to see if their product or their service is even viable, right? And we in the government, it takes months just to come up with a solicitation, and it takes months for us to evaluate, and then it takes months to get to an award decision, and then if you get an award decision and you're the lucky recipient, then you got to go through the whole clearance process. So what I took away from that was what I already knew and understood, which is our process is too lengthy, it's too unwieldy, and it certainly isn't designed for those startup type companies or those companies that are not otherwise incentivized to come do business with the government. So I'm going to turn to Eric because he probably can give you better details. But what we did was came up working with our Science and Technology Directorate with a contractual vehicle that attracts those types of companies. Eric, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Marge, in fact, I just came back from Silicon Valley conference last week where we engaged with those companies we funded. So S&T, through that innovative, streamlined OT award processes, thus far we awarded 23 contracts and then funded 18 companies, and 5 of them are in phase 2 of development. So basically the process that Soraya and the S&T team developed is mimicking the venture capital investment. Basically step 1 would be, hey, submit a 10-page applications. It's sort of a Q&A, very easy to fill. They are used to filling those applications, explaining what technologies that they offer and the value propositions. And among those, we select number of companies for a 15-minute oral pitch. After that, we give the funding decisions the same day. Right. And then within 30 days from that, we award a OT award. We work out, negotiate the IP rights and pricing and deliverables, and then it says, like that, we give the money like soon. And then we do it in 4 different phases so that we can limit our risk level, each up to $200,000 up to 6 months. So it was refreshing to see some of the companies who got funded were there, as well as many other potential non-gov, true blue small companies. It was refreshing for me to see some of these companies giving such a positive feedback to government processes. It's like, wow, you're really saying all these things publicly? So that was like kind of good to see that aspect. So Margie, I think that program is working really well. And Melissa and Doug over there, S&T branch over there. By the way, Silicon Valley, is the name of the program, but they cover all over the country and even international companies. They fund all over the map. So don't get me wrong, it's not just Silicon Valley.
And the shortest lead time for award was 10 days. The longest one, I think, took 45 days. And we actually had the company that took 45 days, and he said, well, it was really my fault because I was negotiating IP rights. So we're really excited about the program because the fact that we're being able to bring in these companies with new ideas, new ways of thinking, and removing that fear of doing business with the government, because that's critical. We need the latest technologies. We need to know what are the tools out there, and we need to get them as early and as quickly as possible.
And part of that is, go ahead.
Just quickly, one more thing. I mean, the government value proposition of that process to the government is essentially what we heard is that if we fund those companies, many cases those companies will get a lot of private funding to develop the same technology. Bottom line, we are not paying for the whole development cycle where we just give the seed money and then we reap the benefit of all these kind of iterative, rapid prototype development. At the end, we are just buying them as commercial items.
I actually start on the other side of this equation sometimes, which is I'm not interested in companies that are brand new sort of startup. I'm focused on companies that are actually mature commercial providers that have a hard time selling to government. And part of the challenge that I experience day to day is that the government can't get out of its own way. We establish all of these extra requirements based on an assumption that we'll need it. And there's actually a programming principle called YAGNI. You ain't gonna need it. And government could do well by practicing some YAGNI. Basically, we don't need top-level security for something that is open data, right? And there are things that we tend to overcomplicate our process and sort of over-assume what is really needed to buy things that are commercially available. I often think about, government loves shared services. The best shared service is one that already exists on the commercial sector. And so I think a lot about how we can sort of streamline our processes to take advantage of the fact that there are tons of commercial providers that want to sell to government, but what they don't want to do is they don't want to have to go down this direction where they are getting a bunch of VC money or they already are IPO'd and they're already a publicly traded company, and they go, yeah, but I have to make all these government requirements and I'm going to have a whole new vertical just for government. That's crazy. What we want is we want companies to be able to say, all right, I'm going down this lane, I'm developing the best product, servicing a huge market, and having government be part of that market.
Well, and the government can be quite intrusive in the business process of a company. And I'm not sure that we always understand what we're asking for, that we can really evaluate that information. So why go there, right? Why don't we let the forces of competition bring these companies in, let them, they know their business better than we do. I often say that. One of the reasons that I am very adamant about industry engagement and getting out as early as possible to the industry is because I think it is a little arrogant that we think we know more about how industry is going to sell that product or service, how they're going to price that. I say, ask them, how do you price that?
I would only say, I say this as a supplement to what Eric is talking about. You cannot meet with, no matter how many road trips, every single secretary and every single head of an agency goes out to the Silicon Valleys of the world. You can't meet with everyone. And I would also venture to say that innovative companies don't just exist out there. They do exist already in the Beltway as federal contractors. And so how do we marry that? We develop collective approaches. In essence, the mentoring programs of the world. Let the one companies, the CACIs or the Lockheeds or the Raytheons or the IBMs or the Deloittes or whomever, let them go out and identify 20 small companies that they will help get through the GSA scheduling process, that they'll help get to the point. When a VC says to a company, I'm demanding 40% return on my investments, and you got to have that margin. And the guy says, well, I'm altruistic, I want to help the government out, and the return is going to be maybe close to 8%, and it's going to take whatever amount of time, and I have to get through a clearance process. Well, if one of the already existing innovative, traditional companies is able to help those smaller companies become part of the team, that's something that we have to encourage as well. And so that's part of this dialogue.
Right, it's the combination of all these
I don't want to just get the latest. I mean, I talked to the CTO of CBP a few years ago, and he said to me, you know, all my folks are on the border are asking for the latest, and I think it was at that time the iPhone 5S. And I said, by the time you go through the process, your folks will get the iPhone 5S, but they're going to be at iPhone 8 or 9. That's the kind of work and discussion and conversation, because you need to identify what the problem is before you say, oh, that's a really, you know,
Cool
shiny
thing.
bauble out there out
Exactly.
in Mountain View, California.
Exactly.
That's the part of the conversation that we want to continue to participate
No,
in.
I certainly agree. I think we have time for one more question. One more question? Anybody else?
Answered every question.
That's good, man. We answered all the questions. What a team. Hey. So let's take a quick minute just to kind of go around. Any final thoughts, Dave?
Well, I will say, you know, the government.
Yeah, they can hear you.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find interesting is that when we talk about the iPhone, a substantial amount of the iPhone was built on government-funded.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I think that sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by thinking about innovation only existing outside of government. Innovation has been inside of government, has been funded by government, and we can do more to, in addition to doing the innovative technology, the innovative practices and processes, and share that out, because ultimately innovation is built on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, I agree.
I cannot thank these kinds of forums. I can't thank ACT-IAC enough for encouraging this. I can't thank you enough both for this today and for everything that the team is doing to encourage the engagement, to encourage the conversation across the life cycle of that process. And I would urge that if this only takes place at an ACT-IAC and you're not doing it within your own agencies, and those of you who are from industry are not encouraging these kinds of conversations to change the culture, then you're setting yourself up for a different kind of failure. Not the failure of not coming up with the right procurement, but the failure of a process that will, I think, raise you know, every boat across the, you know, and to get to the solutions that we need. So thank you, ACT-IAC, and thank you, Soraya.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, often in these kind of conferences, people give a lot of feedback, industry partners, but in the actual acquisitions, they say nothing to the CEO, even if they see some unnecessary, duplicative, inefficient processes. So please speak up in an immediate action so that they can take some reaction to it. In other words, let's fix those immediate actions and then give me a feedback, give DHS feedback, give the contracting team the feedback they need at that time so that they can eliminate those unnecessary processes.
Great. Josh?
I pretty much reiterate what was just said from the other three panelists, but I think what's also important about having industry speak up, I think that the government, and I think it's happening, also needs to recognize that there's no great answer to this and that no one has the answer to it yet. And that we have to keep pushing and asking and never be comfortable with, because that's how we got into the situation that we're in right now. It's just relying on what worked. And again, I think this forum, and I hope more forums in the future really help make that neat. And thank you for being here.
I echo the sentiments of all the speakers here, and more importantly, you know, in 36 years that I've been in the government, I am really encouraged at what I see that we're doing together. When I look across this panel, everybody's enthusiastic and energized to do a better job. And I opened with this comment, and I want to close with this comment. We are all here for the American citizen, for the people who live and visit this country every day, to protect them, to provide services to them. What we do in government is extremely vital. And so getting it right, getting it done as effectively and as efficiently as possible, getting the right tools in the hands of those first responders is critically important. And so thank you all for the great job that you do. I want to thank our industry partners for the great job that they do, because all too often we forget that they're sometimes the unsung heroes of the team sport. But this is a team sport. Thank you all for your participation today. Have a great afternoon. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Want me to get up here? Want me to get up here and say a few words? You gonna adjourn? Okay. Come on up.
Guys, can you give us just a second? We're going to close out. Soraya's got a few remarks.
Don't leave yet.
Just give us like 2 minutes, please.
So thank you, Mitzi. And by the way, I want to apologize to everyone that I didn't get in here early enough yesterday so that Margie and Mitzi could swing the gavel at my head. No, just kidding. No, it's a real honor and a privilege to be here with the ACT-IAC community and to be representing the ACT side of the house. I am always encouraged whenever industry and government can come together for these kinds of events and others to really innovate and see how we can improve government. So I want to thank all of you for your participation. I encourage you to be a member of this organization, to focus on the things that we're working on and help us be better providers of the services in the government. But I wish you mostly safe travels home, and I thank you again for being here. And I really want to thank Mitzi, and I want to thank my predecessor, Margie, for the great job that she's done, and all the members of the ACT-IAC community and workforce for the great job that they do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. And I also hear that your team will be speaking at Acquisition Excellence on June 13th. We have to do a little commercial here. Great. So we look forward to that. We're going to hear more about innovations in acquisition at that event.
So we've reached the wrap up. I don't know if you can believe that, Mitzi, after all the months of planning.
I know,
it's almost
I know.
over.
I'm going to miss you, man.
Yes, I know. It's been great.
Oh. So I just want to wrap up by thanking the Planning Committee once again, and I am going to pull a few names out because I want to thank my committee chairs in no particular order. Faye Farah, the Monday Sessions, Andy Lieber, Keynotes, Paul Chandler, Outcomes, Cheryl Waldrop, Marketing, Sandy Mestry, Outreach, Leslie Berry and Rory on the CXO event, thank you, and Kathleen Turco, who did our CFO plenary. Also, so thank you guys. We also want to thank our sponsors and media partners, and of course the ACT-IAC staff, especially Keisha and Haley, who we worked with a lot. And I want to thank you, Jonathan. You've been great. We really have, over the last 5 months, I think it's been a real example about how government and business can work together, and we've been true to our theme, bridging business and government in preparing for this conference. So we think it's been the best MOC ever, and of course, it's the last MOC
Cheers.
ever, so they kept the best for last.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
So it's been great working for you, and Dave's not here, but I was going to say some remarks to thank Dave. He's been in a tremendous chair for us. He's got 35 more days. He keeps laughing at me as he says that, so if you see him, thank him so much for his leadership last year.
And Mitzi, I have to thank you too. This was a great event. Mitzi did so much work, right? You know, I did some, but Mitzi did a lot. I mean, she really made a big difference. And, you know, it was her leadership that really brought the COIs into the fold and had them drive the sessions on Monday. And I think that was a brilliant idea. I got a lot of positive feedback and about the content, and it was really using the COIs. And you know, Mitzi, whether we did that because we had to, because we didn't have enough time, whatever, the COIs did a great job.
We did the judo flip.
Yes, the judo flip, exactly. Everybody who's still here from a COI, thank you for your hard work.
Yeah.
The sessions were really interesting and very interactive, so we really appreciate that. We want to. There's a survey on the MOC app. Please fill it out. We'll use that information to make future conference decisions better. As you all know, ELC is coming up in a few months. The team working ELC can use your feedback very effectively. And the next version of ELC, a year out from now or a year plus in Philadelphia, is going to be a great opportunity to build on MOC, leverage the best of MOC and ELC for something even better, something we haven't even thought of yet.
Great, great. And also, everybody's found their box lunches. I see the box lunches out there. But those of you staying for the government-to-government event, and I hope you will be, it's going to be upstairs and to the left in the Galleon Room. And so whatever you decide, if you're going to stay or not for that event, we hope you guys have a safe trip back. And we will see you at ELC in Williamsburg, October 29th to the 31st. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great fun. Thank you.
Good job, Mitzi.
Thank you, dear.
You did great.
I'm going to miss you. I am going to miss you. I was talking to you all